Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. My name is Rudina Cesari and I am the founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures, an early stage venture capital firm focused on investments in the application of AI and frontier technologies for the enterprise, security and platform markets. We're delighted to partake on this Boston Globe technology focused event. And I would like to welcome our two speakers for this panel, Stéphane Trouvé and Sirisha Kadamala-Kalva. Stéphane and Sirisha, would you like to join me, please?
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, welcome. So we have a big topic to cover, so I will get started right away. But for a little bit of background and grounding for our conversation, Stéphane is the co-founder and CTO of Recorded Future, a high and fast-growing technology company with a particular focus in the security space and real-time threat detection and intelligence. And Sirisha has recently, as in the last couple of months, I believe, joined a new entity, Data Robot, which is focused, of course, the big vision is the democratization of AI and, an evolving focus on AI cloud. So welcome to you both. I would like to start our conversation with a very high level question around what does the notion of businesses, small and large, mid-market and large enterprises going through a digital transformation mean in the context of your roles and how you view data? Stéphane, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Well, I think what we've seen, especially over the last 2 years with the whole COVID thing, essentially, we've had people have been saying we've had sort of 3 decades of digitalization happening in 2 years. So I think it's pretty remarkable. I mean, first of all, I think it's remarkable how well it's actually worked, how people have adapted to new ways of working and so forth. But of course, it's also opened up for all kinds of new threats to organizations. As you said previously, we're very focused on risk analysis. And we're clearly seeing that as companies move online and people move online more, there are new attack vectors opening up. So I would say that it's both been given a lot of new opportunities, but also a lot of threats which people need to be aware of, both from a private and from a business point of view.
And to that end, Stéphane, sort of when we speak about security, we say every data connection now has become a point of vulnerability. Roughly, do you think that the attacks have grown orders of magnitude higher, some multiples higher? How would you quantify or just give folks a sense of we have in 12 to 18 months, we have advanced in tech adoption, data usage 30 years. What has that done on the security vulnerability side and the attacks?
It's hard to quantify it like that. Maybe it is an order of magnitude, actually, because I think maybe what's being transactioned online now has grown probably an order of magnitude in general. People move, take a simple example, people move from physical meetings where you are pretty aware of who's in the room. All of a sudden you're doing Zoom or Meet or whatever meetings where you can't always even be certain who is in a meeting. And I think,
or in a car for some of us traveling.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm mid-travel here, so I ended up being in a car in the middle of nowhere in England. No, but I think,
to be worried about and appreciated as to what we can do in this day and age, right?
Yeah, no. And I think, as I said, we've sort of quickly jumped into this new way of working, but clearly we haven't sort of updated our practices. I think the example, when occasionally you're in a meeting and all of a sudden some unknown number calls in and people after a while realize that, and then they start wondering, who's this, and the person doesn't answer. And, maybe it's someone who just got the wrong link or something else, but it's a very concrete example, I think, of the new kind of threats. If you're afraid of losing important information, for example, you need to take those kind of things into consideration, of course.
Thank you. And Sirisha, you have just joined Data Robot, and it's a new role. It's a Chief Strategy Officer role. So I'm very curious, back to the same question of what does digital transformation mean, particularly in the context of data as an asset, and how does your role and perspective in both as a CISO, but or not CISO, rather CSO, Chief Strategy Officer, but also in the context of the vision the data robot has. What does it mean for you, and how do you view the world?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. Our mission is to maximize the human intelligence and machine intelligence for enterprises to get value out of data. And ever since we had databases, this is 40 years ago since Oracle came up with relational databases, and probably even prior to that, IBM cards and everything. So we have had so much of data trapped in our systems across various layers, whether it is data warehousing, data storage, et cetera. How do you get value out of data? I mean, we had business intelligence revolution, business analytics revolution. There is so many companies around the data space. Data is probably the second, if not first, biggest component within software from an addressable market standpoint. How to get value out of this. And artificial intelligence, what Data Robot is doing, is the next layer of the kind of intelligence, the kind of predictive insights that you can get from your data. And it is applicable for a small business, medium business, or a very large business, depending on the kind of data that you have access to, the kind of problems that you are solving. And in this era of digital transformation, I think we are going from, I think each company is in a different phase. Different industries are in different phases. Industries that have not digitalized very much are digitalizing now, and industries that have digitalized in the last decade or so, or 2 decades or so, like financial services, they are adopting newer technologies to become even more savvy at utilizing data. So I agree with Stefan's perspective on the acceleration of digitalization that has happened, and where Data Robot comes into picture, and my role comes into picture, is how to enable our customers to go from that data, what we have from a reactive and historical view of data, into proactive intelligence view of data using artificial intelligence.
Okay,
it's so nice that you're doing that and saying that exactly from the perspective we're taking to, you know, so we're focusing on threat intelligence, but our core business is really to help companies understand how they are exposed. You know, just the fact that there is so much information about a company out there now, and no one can really grasp it. So clearly, one thing we need to know is not only help people understand how, or companies understand how they can use their internal data resources, but also be savvy both about which external data sources they could be using in their business. But thirdly, also in which way they are exposing their own data, you know, maybe directly or maybe through their customers and suppliers and partners and so on.
So let me take both of your comments, and let's start unpeeling the onion, if you will, on the data piece. Let me start with the notion of leveraging your data, or data as an asset. Sirisha, financial institutions have had orders of magnitude bigger data than most other players for decades on end. From that perspective, what has changed around, and the data keeps growing and growing exponentially, but what has changed in the last 5 to 10 years with the advent of ML and AI, and how's that altering, whether it's financial institutions or more broadly, as you see your customer base evolve, you know, driving the adoption of AI and frontier technologies in your view?
Yeah, no, definitely. Look, AI has existed forever, right? Stefan can attest to this based on his education degrees as well from MIT. Ever since the 1960s paper that came out that machines will take over human beings, it hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it'll happen in the next few decades. In my view, what has changed is the maturity in data management systems. enterprises have now are much more mature in their data lifecycle. And the second one is, I would say, even the general availability of these technologies. While machine learning has been there, the intersection of the compute, the ability to compute at very rapid rates, and ability to crunch data in a very high volume velocity manner, together with the need to survive and be better in the marketplace. Like financial services institutions are always looking for, what is the next innovation that I can invest in to gain that advantage, the edge over competitors? And all of these three together, especially in the last, I would say 10 years or so after Google acquired DeepMind, that's when I see a real kind of takeoff with respect to the mind share and focus on AI within commercial enterprises. It's been there in pockets before that too, but since that time, AI has become top of mind because now you have the compute resources, you have the data on which you can apply. And companies like DataRobot are also democratizing AI, where it's not just your data scientists, but your business analysts can also derive the value out of the platform. So all these things together, I would say, have tipped the scale towards enterprises investing more and more in AI.
So it's interesting because from a startup vantage point, or I suppose what Recorded Future and DataRobot used to be before they became bigger and some got acquired, we saw the change sort of in academia mid 2012 and in industry 2016, particularly around sort of the advances in the algorithms, and particularly around deep learning, and less attributable in those instances to sort of general AI, which is what DeepMind, focused more and much more around the applied AI. But I want to piggyback off of what you said around sort of the businesses want to stay forward thinking, and more importantly, get ahead of their existential threat, which is if they're not leveraging data, someone else will. How do you think about the cost of data? Because it's one thing that the compute costs have come down. It's another thing that the cost of storing data on demand, think about it, hot storage and being in the cloud remains very, very expensive. So we can all talk about the value of data and AI, the intelligence, the predictives and prescriptives someday that we can tap into. But if it costs $20 to $40 million to have a year's worth of data on demand, how much value can we really derive? How do you think about that dynamic, and how does DataRobot, approach that challenge for enterprises?
Yeah, so we typically don't run into the cost of data challenges. What we run into is cost of teams, the talent that's required to do these projects. Storage, for all intents and purposes, there are so many different tiers of storage that you can efficiently store terabytes and petabytes of data these days, and it's growing exponentially, right? So data storage is less of an issue. What's important is what you do with that data, right? How are you able to connect the disparate sources of data that's in your enterprise, how you're able to get value out of these disparate sources? That is where a lot of mess lies, and that's the overly tangled part in enterprises that a lot of different companies in the data management space, we do data preparation as well, specifically focused for data science efforts. But that untangling of how you can get value out of data is even more important, in my view, than that data storage part.
Yeah, I mean, the cost still remains expensive, and that's why the snowflakes and everyone else in the market has emerged. But let me shift to security. Stefan, it used to be that one more endpoint was great, and these days it's like, no, no, no. You have AI, bad actors with AI engines and good actors going on the defense. How has data changed the security business? Not simply sort of more data, more vulnerabilities, but also as you look at providing real-time solutions to an ever-evolving market.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's first of all, I have to agree with Sirisha. I don't think that the cost of data storage is actually what's prohibiting people from doing things. I think there are extremely few businesses where that would be the key factor. I think the sort of organizing or management of data, and as you said, Sirisha, the cost of the people needed to do it is by far surpasses the actual storage cost and so on. But on the security side, as you said, it's another field where we have become more data driven, and we have to become more data driven. So, both if you look at on the good guys, in terms of needing to have more extensive monitoring of all their systems, all their endpoints, all their networks and so on, it's huge amounts of data. That's why we have companies like Splunk, for example, and others which have come up and who are now helping manage the raw data. But it's the same thing there. Deriving value out of the raw data is really the hard part. I mean, that's why we're taking this opposite approach of looking from the outside in on companies, because of course, you could keep track of all the IP addresses in the world which your systems are communicating with, but that's meaningless data unless you have some kind of information about what's dangerous, what are the bad IP addresses. So I think the fascinating things there happens at the intersection between your own corporate security or network data and what you can get from the outside world. Yeah, no, go on.
No, I was going to say, where do you find, sort of as you look at the market, where do you find most attacks or vulnerabilities occur? Is it still organized, attackers, if you will, whether they're state-sponsored or organized crime, going straight on after big institutions? Is it more that they're coming through back doors around, trusted vendor networks or your supply chain? How should we think about that part of it?
I think, first of all, I mean, it depends a bit on which industry you're in. If you're defense industry, for example, then you should probably worry significantly about state actors who would be interested in stealing IP from you and so on. But if you look at, any sort of general company, I would say that the biggest threat today is definitely right now, the ransomware gangs. And the reason is that they are completely oblivious to who you are and what you're doing. They are hunters. They're going after the weakest animals in the flock, if you like. So if your system happens to be, out of date and not patched and vulnerable, they will find that and they will execute on it and lock down your systems and demand a ransom for it. And it's interesting, so they really haven't developed their technology a lot in recent times. What's happened is that they actually developed their business models, if you like. So, the fact that they've professionalized it, they've separated out between the guys who write the ransomware and take care of getting the ransom paid and the people who help them get into vulnerable systems. Very, very simple, but still it's a big shift, because that means that they can scale much better. All of a sudden, they can solicit assistance from small crooks who happen to have access to one system, and they get a piece of the pie when there's a successful attack. So that's meant that it's scaled up. That's why we see definitely an order of magnitude increase in ransomware attacks, and across the board, everything from small companies to the largest corporations, hospitals, and whatnot.
Fascinating. So a question to both of you, sort of coming back to the 30,000 foot level. You say data, you say AI, the thing that comes up immediately is either shortage of talent on the data scientist and related side, or, oh my gosh, AI is taking my jobs. So let's tackle both of those, the truths and the myths, and I'll open it to both of you, whoever wants to go first. But let's tackle with the sort of the need for data science talent, ML talent. How are you viewing that piece in the labor market, and perhaps helping both tackle it somehow and trying to identify new talent for your own organizations?
I could go first if you like. So, I mean, there is definitely in sort of industry overall a shortage of talent, no doubt. But I think also the threshold for applying AI has gone down significantly over the last, let's say decade or something, in terms of ready-made libraries. And, there are a lot of things you can do without actually writing code now, even for some basic machine learning applications, for example.
Yeah.
That said, there is still a huge need for more talent. And I think maybe people are overemphasizing, the fact that you should hire your sort of newly baked AI engineers straight out of university. I think what companies should do more is actually focus on educating their current engineers, etc. I think if you have a solid software background, taking the step into starting working with AI technologies and machine learning and so on, it's not insurmountable at all. So I think, that push on educating your current employees, I think, is maybe the fastest path to actually starting to do things.
And it's an interesting notion, right? Because when we've talked about retraining workforces, it's always been blue collar roles as opposed to the highest of the highest trained and typically the highest paid talent. So it's an interesting notion to say, hey, we've entered a new wave in tech, and let's get our very talented group of employees and retrain them. Sirisha, how do you see it, and how does it manifest for you?
It manifests for us on a day-to-day basis. That's what DataRobot does, democratizing AI. I mean, data scientists' time is valuable. There are, if you add up all the PhDs that graduated in the last few decades, you get only a certain number, right, from a data science perspective. So I agree with Stefan about the educating the workforce. Every employee needs to look at companies' data, at their own company's data, and should be able to take decisions. That's the ultimate stage that we all want to get to. That's the holy grail. Data-driven enterprises. This term gets thrown around a lot, but the ubiquity of that data-driven insights, the democratization of that AI-driven insights is what DataRobot strives for. So essentially, it's not just about a person who can code that DataRobot. Using DataRobot, a data scientist who can code can create models, but a business analyst or a data analyst or a data engineer who doesn't want to code or doesn't have time to code or is not as well versed with data science algorithms can go create AI models in a matter of minutes on DataRobot. So the very founding principle of DataRobot is to democratize AI, because you cannot hire talent fast enough in technology these days. All roles, there is a lot of demand that's outstripping supply for most of the technology roles these days, and also specifically in the data science space. So it's important that platforms like DataRobot add value and democratize that piece of data analysis.
So Sirisha, riffing off of that idea, in other facets of software, we've seen strongly the emergence of low-code or no-code products. So would it be fair to conclude that what you're conveying is effectively where DataRobot is trying to be very analogous to, you don't need to be a data scientist to be able to leverage AI and even create AI models. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I want to, there's a fine line that I want to say. Data scientists that love to code, we respect them immensely. And that's a key persona to which DataRobot sells to. In an enterprise. And data scientists can get a ton of value out of DataRobot platform. And along with it, given you cannot hire data scientists at the rapid rate that you will need for your businesses, whether it is cost prohibitive or time prohibitive or shortage of talent, we are able to, in a 100% GUI format, graphical user interface. So you can call it as no code, I guess, in the latest term, Data Robot can help your business analyst to do models. So we serve both personas. Does that answer your question, Rutina?
Yeah, no, it does, which is, I think there is a rise of, democratization across technology. How about the other side of the equation, which is there's been a lot that's been published around automation away of jobs. And again, these are high paying roles, and what AI, what role AI plays in that. What are your views far beyond your own organizations around concerns of automating away jobs?
Yeah, this came up in a customer meeting just yesterday. Like, does your product kill jobs? Like, no, not at all. It creates jobs because you're upskilling the enterprise to get value out of data, and you will actually need to hire just to get value out of data, right? That whole value chain, you need DBAs, you need data engineers, you need data analysts, you need so many different people for that value chain before you utilize Data Robot platform and after you utilize the entire value chain. So my view on automation is there is, again, to my earlier point, there is shortage of talent out there. There is shortage of good talent out there. And employees love it when you're able to automate the mundane pieces of their work, and they are able to focus more time and effort on what is truly needle moving for the business, and what even truly that they like to do and they are personally passionate about doing. So if anything, automation of these helps employees to do more and better and faster and more efficiently as well. So my view of automation is not about losing jobs. It's about upskilling of workforce and ability to do things faster, better, and just more volume.
Stefan, with the current state of AI, can we even truly claim that there is end-to-end automation? I'm looking for are we in a state of end-to-end automation that's either here or coming soon, or is it a human in the loop type play?
No, I mean, I've been saying for decades, actually, I think that
say it again.
Yeah, exactly. And I love this. I'm always talking about this when I talk about what we do. The fact that in computer chess, they have this term, they call it centaurs. Yeah. Centaur is, it's this old man and horse thing. But in chess, it's when you take a good chess program and you have it work together with a human chess player. And up until 2 years ago, maybe, when DeepMind did their AlphaZero, etc., the best chess player in the world was actually a combination of a human and an algorithm playing chess. And same thing I'm talking about that we're doing centaur threat analysts. I think it's the same story all over, that algorithms need to work together with people. And what AI is allowing us to do over time is to sort of move the threshold for what the machine can do. There are a couple of tricky things in that. I think the most tricky part is to have, let's call it a fancy word, self-conscious AI, an algorithm which actually understands when it should hand over to the human. The best example is in self-driving cars. I mean, one of the big reasons self-driving cars haven't come around yet is that it's very, very hard for a car to decide when it's not really capable of understanding the road and being able to drive. And then you have the challenge that at that point, you have a millisecond to hand over to human driver. That just doesn't work. But I think it's the same in many fields, that to understand where to draw the line between what the humans can do and what the machines can do is tricky. And then to understand how to do that handover in a good way.
I completely agree. And I think that to both of your points, you also have the facet where the mundane and the repeatable means that it's data that repeats. So you might have more structured data and more easily usable data, so that you can push to the machine, especially where faster processing with the compute that we covered can be done. And then you can leave the more creative piece to the humans in hopes that, we think outside the box, with the challenge that you just noted, Stefan, which is that tricky handoff of back and forth.
But I think also sometimes you actually, something which you thought needed a lot of human creativity and so on. Sometimes I think when you can come to a point where you realize that it's actually pretty straightforward to shift to do algorithmically. One example in the intelligence business, they like to talk about this cycle of intelligence when you plan what you're going to do, and then you go out and collect data and you analyze it and you write reports, and then you do more planning. This planning phase is something we've been working on to see what can we automate there. And actually, just having the algorithms in that case, look at the existing data, understand where the holes are, where should you look for more information. It's something which actually lends itself surprisingly well to do with algorithms for some cases. But as you said, there is always this sort of creative part, or maybe the part where you synthesize a lot of sort of seemingly disparate pieces of information into a holistic picture. Those are clearly examples where humans still shine. Most humans, at least, still shine compared to machines.
By the way, as a side comment, I'm very, very curious what your view is as you think about the dark web, which I know Recorded Future, offers capabilities on that front. Historically, we've had literally humans posing as bad actors to go and support their clients. Is that a role to fully automate? It's a loaded question. Go ahead.
Before you jump to dark web, I wanted to close the loop on the prior discussion. I want to make 3 points. One is, we are ways away from machine-only automation. Maybe it'll never come.
If ever, yep.
And the second one is, at Data Robot, we don't use the word automation very much. We use augmentation as the word, because machines help human beings to do something better, faster, just like how we didn't have calculators, and calculators really helped us to do a lot of data crunching faster. And the third thing I would say is just taking an example of fraud detection, whether a transaction is fraud or not. Why would any human being want to see a computer monitor day in and day out and figure out whether something is a false positive or a false negative? Look at patterns in your data and automate a lot of it. And then instead of analyzing 100% of your transactions, analyze only maybe 3 to 5% of your transactions, which are high value. So that is the kind of leverage that you get with machine intelligence. So we are very big proponents of augmented intelligence, where the ability for humans to do a lot more comes because of certain parts of the workflow being automated to a certain extent. So overall, it's augmented intelligence.
It's interesting, because maybe that's a sign of sort of immaturity in the field, because we're using the words differently. So when we talk about automation, it's really about doing, machines doing things which humans can do well. In our case, reading text, understanding the gist of the message in a text, or driving a car. Humans do it great, but it's hard to scale up humans. So therefore we scale it with algorithms. Whereas augmentation for me is really when you have algorithms that go beyond what humans can do. For example, looking at huge data sets or very high dimensional data, which our small brains actually don't do very well in many cases. So that's what I like to call augmentation. Maybe we need to sort of normalize our nomenclature here at some point.
Well, but you can also appreciate both of you. I think it's interesting to be on the listening end, because Data Robot, as you think about the adoption of the products, you have to deal with these incorrect biases around my job is going to be automated. So all of a sudden you talk about, I'm augmenting you, not replacing and taking your job away. Perhaps when selling, Recorded Future products, that's not the same challenge. I find that very, very often. So in fact, automation and augmentation or human in the loop, people play with those terms.
Yeah.
More
no, I think we I think we agree fully on the different use cases, and you're right. I also don't believe that the typical cases is that you replace humans with automation. So, either you automate parts so that the humans can focus on the hopefully more interesting and more demanding tasks. But in many cases, when you automate with algorithms, you do that to do things which you could never do it with humans, because it would just not be possible from a cost perspective. Reading everything that's published on the internet, you would not like to hire the 100,000 people you would need to do that with humans.
Nope, nope,
So,
you wouldn't. But we're already acclimating into that. It's the more immediate, oh my gosh, how will my role change, that perhaps feels more threatening. What about the privacy piece of data? Data explodes. There's a lot of regulation, as I'm sure both of you are very familiar, whether it's GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, Brazil, Argentina have increasingly instituted privacy laws that are pretty stringent. How do you think about the privacy piece of data, not simply from a right or wrong point of view, but also what it means for everyday enterprises, and how do we create value, but also, comply with giving the owners of their data, their own data, and abide by their privacy rules. Any thoughts on that?
yeah, I would say, I mean, first of all, I think it's excellent that we have legislation which provides protection for consumers. I think it's even more important for companies to be transparent, beyond this legislation. I think you need to be very transparent in what data you're collecting and how you're using it. And hopefully, as consumers become more aware, they will require this. I think we're in some extent, we're on path towards that. But I still think people in general do not understand how much information about themselves they are giving away. And more specifically, they don't understand the sort of values which comes out of combining different sources. You take your credit card information, your information from your phone on where you've been physically located, and all these other trails we leave behind us. And the fact that when they get combined, how complete a picture you can actually build of someone.
Sarisha, any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts.
Send them our way. Do share.
Regina, you're touching on all the fundamental key tenets on which DataRobot operates. Privacy, security, governance, compliance, our lineage, they are so important, and the relative importance of these is in different sectors. Some more highly regulated sectors are much more kind of are investing in here, but it's also geographies. From Europe, California, different states within the US, there is a lot of difference. But fundamentally, I think we are going to a state where each country, each subset of the population will have their own rules, and it is best to operate at the highest level of rules from a privacy, security, governance, compliance standpoint. And part of DataRobot has a ton of SaaS customers. Most of our new customers are on our SaaS platform. However, in certain industries, we are still predominantly on premises because of this privacy, security, etc. And that's one way enterprises, at least in the near to medium term, are having control on their own destiny by owning the software that they deploy on-prem so that the data doesn't leave their systems. And the second one is even in an on-premises installation, it's very important that AI needs a lot of different dimensions of data. How do you make sure that the person that you're giving access to for the data actually needs to have access to that data, right? That whole data lineage and data catalog, that becomes very, very important. The third thing I would say is the trust in DataRobot comes from us having guardrails in our own product on on all of these, like your access permissions, what you can do with the data, and also the bias and fairness on top of how algorithms run, how they interpret the data. All of this together, we call it as our trusted AI effort. Ethics come into picture here. So data is privacy, ethics, and trust. These are very, very massive topics. And that's one of the reasons why, either every enterprise can do it by themselves, or they can trust a platform like DataRobot that has put millions of hours and thought process into all of these and has established guardrails into the platform. And that is a key reason why customers actually come to DataRobot from a trusted AI perspective.
So let me continue on the thread of privacy. In the US, we care about privacy. In Europe, even more so, at least if the regulatory environment is an indicator. And then we have other countries, such as China, where, you know, tongue in cheek, but how do you spell privacy? So on the one side, you know, ethics matters, and at no point should we compromise. And there's already challenges as to how the internet evolved and what happens with first-party data and third-party data. But what about a comparative and competitive advantage? We're having to contend with privacy, and we collectively, I hope I'm not making a somewhat of a unusual statement, we collectively believe that privacy matters and ethics matter. I'll come back to transparent and explainable AI in a second, Sirisha. How do we compete at a global level with countries or agents that do not place the same value and in fact exploit that lack of privacy? How do we stay ahead?
China is changing too, right? All the recent news around safeguarding their own data. At the end of the day, data, again, that state, the steady state that I'm talking about, the future state, data will become very, very important for any country in that future state. But what you're bringing up, Rodina, is until we get to that future state, what's in the interim and how we can, how different countries take advantage. I mean, we are neutral from a DataRobot perspective on how enterprises utilize their data. We provide a platform for them to put their data and get intelligence out of it. And it has to be the responsibility of every single enterprise on how they use data and what they use data for at the end of the day. So we put guardrails from an internal access permissioning catalog perspective, but ultimately what you're raising is a very company to company, enterprise to enterprise decision.
Stefan?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree that China is changing. Unfortunately, I think it's changing to the worse. So I think we're seeing even more now how the state there is trying to take over more information. You know, a good recent example is how they've been trying to shut down, for example, or control, you know, some payment services and promoting their own central bank digital coins instead. That's a good example of where the state wants to take more control. And of course, if you own the right to monitor how people are using their digital currency, that's another great way of seeing who's doing what and who's sponsoring what and so on. I'm unfortunately quite pessimistic about where China is going in that sense. And of course, there are other states as well who are going in the same direction. So and I'm quite fearful about how those kind of states will be using technology to increase monitoring of their populations. And of course, not only their populations, you know, you can also see how China, for example, is selling surveillance technology to other not so nice states in Africa, for example. So I think, you know, I don't want to be too black and white, but I think there are very scary examples right now of how surveillance technology based on AI is spreading to exactly the countries where you don't want it to be.
By the way, as I'm about to embark on the next question, I would like to let the audience know that, you know, we only have a few minutes left on this discussion, and please post any questions for Q&A after this next question. I'd love to pick from your set of questions. As we think about sort of the string around security, data, privacy, let's talk a little bit about data biases, because I think we hinted on the misuse of data, but what about the data sets that we have and are using, and all the implicit or explicit biases How do we think we will deal with those as an industry? So less about your specific company level, but more at an industry level, especially in the face of increased scrutiny at the government and regulatory entities.
Sorry, now I lost my track of my question here. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure, absolutely. Data biases and how that is getting embedded in.
Sorry. No, I think the most important thing happening is that the industry has become so much more aware, and there's research being done on this as well now, how to detect bias and how to avoid it. And, the European Union has published ethical guidelines for how to use AI, which is also a good step towards that. So I think, honestly, researchers working on these things some years back were not aware of the problem even. But I think no one, I mean, you have to be living in a very dark hole somewhere if you're not touched by the whole debate that's been around how to create ethical AI and how to avoid bias of all kinds. And, and there's technology being developed for better detecting it, for example, which I think is great.
And what about on the algorithmic side? Any thoughts around explainable AI, not just sort of the biases on the data, but on being able to explain what goes on in the black box, and which is ideally then explainable, so no longer a black box. And how do you think about that vis-a-vis with what's proprietary and around the product that you've developed and you are for-profit entity? How do we think about those tensions?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, explainability, transparency, auditability is extremely important. It is about how, if a model makes a prediction, how can you track the lineage as to why model exactly came to that prediction? We invest a lot in that, and all of this also is part of our trusted AI. So we are very big proponents of it. And the data bias that you talked about, data is going to be biased, right? Because data is a collection of human decisions up until the point, historical human decisions. So if we had made decisions in a certain way, data will be biased inherently. So it is about how you detect those biases. We actually there is a whole team at DataRobot that focuses on nothing but explainability and bias reduction, and incorporating those checks and balances within the software on okay, we are not going to give you by race or by gender, those types of functionality in the system for certain use cases. So we dormant some features in our platform. We ensure that there are guardrails put in place for others, and there are algorithmic ways in which you can detect these. But at the end of the day, for each prediction, it's very important that there is a trace of explainability as to how you came to that prediction.
Thank you. So as we wrap up this session, any parting, ideally uplifting thoughts around data and AI and where we are headed as an industry, as a society, and sort of what do we have to look forward to perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm excited for myself and for my daughter, and for all the folks out there for AI.
Why for your daughter? I have a daughter too, a young daughter. So why, now you hit a point. Why for your daughter? What do you think it will mean for her?
Yeah, I think it's about, the human ways of connecting with people, like the human elements, the psychology, the philosophy, all these subjects will become more and more important in the future, is my personal view on all of this. Anything that has repeatability and predictability could get automated, but what really cannot get automated is the human nature itself, right? So that is where I'm very upbeat that the world is going to be Again, I don't want to use adjectives, better or worse or anything, but it's going to be for my daughter needs to focus on some of the things. It's not just about being a computer science jockey, but also about how to incorporate the psychology part of it. So that's why I'm very excited.
So a new world of opportunities for the AI native generation. Stefan, what excites you?
I'm also excited, even though I sounded doom and gloomy before. No, I think that's exciting.
Lift us up.
I have two sons who are in their final years at university studying AI and machine learning. So I'm excited for them. They get to start at a much higher level than I did, for example. No, but what's exciting me most about, where the technology is going is, I think, really the application of AI to science itself. We're starting to see some examples now of protein folding being done with these technologies, but I think there's so much more to do, and we talk about augmenting or automating pretty mundane tasks, but we're starting now to actually see how it can be used to do better science. And I think that's where you get the exponential factor of exciting things happening to me down the road, so medicine and all kinds of sort of basic science, I think, will benefit tremendously from having an augmented researcher working with an algorithm in doing larger experiments and so on. I think that's going to be super exciting.
I share your sentiment, and I think, as we think about bringing it back perhaps to our children in this, AI native age, there will be an opportunity perhaps to transform our lives, not just to do good, not just to do well, but also to do good in this world, and perhaps solve diseases with faster and better drug discovery, discover farther in science, and ultimately give breadth and depth to the other side of humans, and then our thinking and our creativity. Well, I will pause our discussion here. Thanking both Sirisha and Stepan for this conversation, and the Boston Globe for facilitating and organizing the gathering. Thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for guiding us through this.
Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.